What I want everyone to know here is that today we are so gifted to be just welcomed by this panel of mentors that have extensive experience in everywhere from product to digital design to mobile design and have chosen to specialize in user experience across all of those facets. They are experts in cognitive science and human computer interaction as it actually applies to real technology. And so, with that, I'm first going to introduce Miss Candra Gill, who is a UX architect. I have been so gifted to know Candra for a number of years and have worked with her directly. And she currently works for Cox Automotive, again, principal UX architect. And then we have Miss Sybil, and I'm not going to butcher your last name, even though we've known each other forever.
That's okay. It's okay. It's Mulokwa.
I'm so sorry that I've never gotten it right after all this time. But she is the head of design at Blue Cora, encompassing multiple different disciplines as part of her work in leading their design efforts. And Miss Clara Sim is coming to us with huge amounts of experience in product and UX design. I swear we met in San Antonio, like what feels like almost 10 years ago. And it has been amazing seeing your career progress in that time period. She is currently a senior product designer at Rareborn and has worked on so many different aspects of technology that you're actually interacting with today. So, as part of that, I just want to thank everyone for being here and give you a little bit of backstory on some of our folks here. Anything that y'all would like to add about yourselves?
Gosh, I will add that living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I don't know if you guys want to hear the whole backstory, but I met Stacy years ago at a company we were both working at, and I instantly recognized genius in her, and I'm just so glad to be able to work with her. So when she asked me to do this, I was like, yeah, 100%. That's not even a question. You should have just signed me up and sent me a Zoom link and I would have been here either way. But I'm super excited to get to know everybody else, Clara and Candra. It's been really great chatting with you ahead of time. And Melissa, you did great. So I'm just excited to be here tonight.
Agreed, definitely.
And, Clara and I just kind of struck up at a hackathon for kids, literally hanging out overnight, trying to make sure that preteens don't do anything too crazy. So that was such an interesting experience. It was like the largest kids hackathon that had ever been done. It was like literally 2,000 people or something. It was like a high school, but it's full of middle school kids. Um, but anywho, that's not the focus of today, but thank you so much for everyone here. I'm gonna throw one it seems soft, but it's hard. What is user experience? How do you define it?
That's a great question. I'll jump in. And I didn't give this a ton of thought. This is just off the top of my head, but it's interesting as you think about user experience and the career and what it is, and then actually what we do. And so I think a lot of people still have a misconception that user experience is pushing pixels and making pretty pictures. Which is obviously not the right answer, but it's taking the user into consideration as you're building the experience, and not just digital experiences, but gets into service design. I mean, there's such a broad array of roles that user experience practitioners can have. And so, for me, it's literally just taking the user, putting yourself in their shoes and building an experience that serves their needs. So that's my short and sweet definition.
I love the definition, and I also love the differentiation between what we do and what the definition of user experience is. I would add that we really want to think about how the people we build our products for, use them, and how what we're doing is helping people complete tasks and meet goals or not, because user experience, we want it to be good, but it often isn't. And one of the ways that we can do better work is acknowledging the ways where it's not good and improving that. So definitely keeping the people who are actually using the things we build at the center of the practice, remembering that our part of it is a very small part of a larger life that people are working in and living in, and making those experiences as good as possible for actually helping people complete the tasks and meet the goals that they're trying to do.
For me, I agree with all of that. I actually get this question a lot, what is UX? It's weird that it's been around for so long and I still get that question, like, what is it that you actually do with your time? I've had to explain it to everyone at least once in my life. And I've come to maybe the simplest way that I can explain is that UX is user experience. It's basically how users feel about interacting with the product, but also with the company and its services. In that sense, there's a lot that goes into the user experience, not just the way that you might have set up the layout or the grid of a product, but also the way a company might communicate with its customers and the services that are connected with it. It all goes into that, I think. And yeah, whether or not you were successful in making a product that is not only delightful to use, but also very useful to your users, very valuable in their lives, and still allows the business to meet its goals within its business constraints, I would say is, I guess, the definition of a successful UX design. Yeah.
All right. So now I'm going to split it. How is user experience different from user interface? A lot of times when people talk about designers, they're like, oh, it's our UI UX, right? But I know a lot of designers that are UI designers, and I know a lot of designers that are UX designers, and they get lumped into the same group, or you might get more with one skill set or like an entire department that's only UI, and hey, it shows in the product. But I would say it shows in the product rating, like the the UI. A good UI team, like, it looks shiny and nice, but the ratings suck. And, so how do you describe the differences between user experience and user interface, but then also how do they work together? How does that come together to create a cohesive experience? And actually a little bit of like, what's it like to work in that space, and like how do you work in that? Like, I've never been a designer, I have no idea, right?
Yeah. I'll take first stab at this one. UI and UX, that was something that it took me a little bit of time, because I've done them both, and I am not great at doing UI design at all. I'm a terrible designer in regards to making things shiny and pretty. I know beautiful design when I see it, and I also know good UX when I see it, even if the UI might not be as great. So, perfect way to illustrate it. So I was talking to, I'm not going to name which company, but I was talking to one of the directors of development. And I was telling him, I'm like, yeah, like, we need people that are going to be focused on, UI engineers. They're going to be really focused on adding that fit and finish and that polish to the experience. And his answer was like, oh, everybody on the team is full stack. I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's not what we need. We don't need a full stack developer that can't do UI. It's definitely a skill set where you make the front of the experience look and feel and move in the right ways. And so we were launching a product, and I took the product screenshots of the product and just kind of did like a little video of how it moved and how it behaved. And I took that back to the lead, one of the leaders of the QA department and one of the directors of the engineering department. And I said, you see this, like, this isn't what was designed. And they're like, it looks exactly right. All the buttons are there. The language is right. Like, what's the problem? And then I showed them the prototype of what the designer designed, and it was not the same. And they still couldn't see it. And so that's when I was like, okay, this isn't as obvious to everybody as it is to me. So for me, UI is like, that fit and finish and polish pixel perfection as it pertains to UX. And then UX is like, it's such a large umbrella. It could be the interaction design. It can be the information architecture. It could be the flow of data as it makes its way down the screen. There's so many different areas that a UI person, they'll make it look good. There's enough white space. It's balanced. But if the experience is poor and the language is poor, then you're not quite nailing it on the UX front. And for me, I've worked in companies where UX and UI work together. And so what they did was they had experience designers and interaction designers. And so the experience designers, they were considered like UI. They would add the fit and finish and the polish. They had more of a visual take on the work that they were doing. And like the interaction designers were doing like interaction and trying to figure out, and then there was a whole separate department that did content. And so it was like this kind of, larger companies have more resources so they can be a little bit more specialized in the tasks that they do. But as far as how they work together, I love to see like UI, UX working very tightly together, along with content and research, information architecture, service design if you need it. So there's all these different disciplines that can come together. And there are designers that can do it all and do it all very well. But there are definitely people that, specialize in one area or the other, and that's okay. You need to be T-shaped. I can put together a UI design, but you're not going to love it and it's not going to win awards, but it'll work well. So I would say that's kind of my definition, which I know that's a lot of words, but that's it's definitely one of those things where I've figured out that, not everybody kind of gets the nuance and the difference. So that's my take.
Sybil, I love that you mentioned T-shaped, because I will come at folks with, I tend to be the person who comes with a lot of academic references. I was in the academic world before I changed careers into UX. And one that I really like is Boersma's T model. So this is a model where you have UX across the top and you have a lot of subdisciplines. And so subdisciplines will include things like software engineering, they'll include research. The original model did not have content strategy. It needs to have content strategy and all the different subsets of content that go in there. And so UI to me is a part of the whole user experience. And there are people who are much, much better at all of the things that Sybil discussed than say I am, as somebody who's worked in UX for like a decade now. And that's good. So the way I like to describe it is you take this T model or whatever model you're talking about, and you figure out which of those subsets are your areas of expertise or your areas of focus, and you find the people who fill the holes that you have. Because ideally you're on a team where people are reinforcing each other's skills. And so some of the best work I've ever done has been when I'm the UX person, who, however you want to define that. I've been a UX architect, I've been an experienced designer, I've had a lot of titles, but I'm connected with somebody who is probably going to be defined as a UI designer or sometimes I've seen the breakdown as UX designer, UX architect. I've experienced that a lot, but it's just basically we have complementary skills and we work together really well. And so, I might have a bigger focus on structural issues, on making sure that things are understandable, easily communicated, the right content is there, that we've done the research to verify all of these things. And the UI person might be more along the lines of, I'm in love with animations and this subtle animation will make people really understand what's going on. And like, that's not my thing at all, especially since I tend to be somebody who has an issue with animations in terms of my personal cognitive stuff. But they're right, like subtle animations can help something be far more functional, things like that. So all of it overlaps. And so you end up working with people who have complementary skills, and that's the way to get a fantastic product.
Well, yeah, it sounds like Candra and Sybil have all said a lot of what I was going to say. Okay, so I guess I'll draw from my experience. From what I've experienced, I've noticed that there is a lot of people who run around with the title like UX designer or UX UI, and the ones who have the UX UI title seem to be more UI than UX. I'm not sure if that's the same outside of the Bay Area, but I noticed that here. As to the question, what is the difference between UI and UX? I think I would again have to say that UX is how a user feels about interacting with your product, the company, services, while UI is how the user interacts. So, with UI, like think the icons, the visual layout, basically all the visual things that might go into a design system. While UX might be more about, the wireframing, where those components are going to be on the screen, things like that, and in the flow that the user will find themselves in once they're interacting with, the elements, how they work together. I would say that UI is a component of UX, as UI, since that's how the user interacts, it definitely will affect the experience that your user will have when they're interacting with your product. And again, like if the UI is not great, the rest of the UX might fail. So there's definitely, a partnership there in which, both sides would have to be, working really well in order for the product to succeed.
Yeah, and kind of to that effect, we've had somebody in the audience ask, can we speak to this whole full stack UI UX combo I keep seeing in the market? Seems like a very heavy workload.
It is a heavy workload, and I think that some of it is just the nature of like various industries go through cycles. Whether or not we should even do documentation is one of the things that goes back and forth. Basically, people are like, we're taking too long to document. We don't need documentation. And then people are like, why did we make all these decisions? We should do documentation. And so like that kind of cycle happens. And I think this full stack thing is part of that too. Because, UI is part of UX, and ideally you would have kind of this really robust situation where people who are on the UX side of things would know all of that stuff. So yeah, why wouldn't you want somebody who can do all of it? But also, I'll tell you why you might want somebody who, you might not want somebody who can do all of it. It's because you do end up specializing. Like people, whether they mean to or not, I totally agree with what you said about a lot of people who say they're UX UI tend to over-index on UI. That's not uncommon, and I don't think that it's surprising. It's the thing that ends up being delivered, for example. But taking the time to do those wireframes, taking the time to do that preliminary research, taking the time to do a lot of that other stuff that doesn't necessarily get lumped in with UI, requires developing a certain skill set. It also requires having buy-in from your team to take. The reason why I keep saying taking the time to is that's often the thing that gets brought in as the reason to not do it. It's like, you're taking too much time. So just understanding that all of the sub-disciplines, there's reasons to have a team of people. Some of the best UX architect type people I've ever met will never be good UI designers. It's just not in their skill set, but they're gonna help you make really functional, amazing, delightful software. And you pair somebody like that up with somebody who is a stunning UI designer who's never gonna care about like all of the work that you're doing to make an incredible architecture of, truly findable, invisible behind the scenes stuff in terms of how you've structured your site or product. You get those two people together, and that could be a larger than two people team, because like we should bring in our content experts, we should bring in all kinds of folks. you get better products out of that, but you also have to hire more people. And sometimes people are trying to save money and time.
Yeah, seconding that notion that I don't think it's going to be very easy for anyone to master all aspects of I mean, what it takes to be a UX UI developer, engineer, designer. I mean, yeah, I've seen a lot of people who have that title, but there's always one aspect of their work where they really shine, and then there's maybe other parts where they would rather not specialize in. Even around here, if I've spoken to UX engineers, that's actually what their titles are, asking them if you see the necessity in being both a UX designer and an engineer, and like how does that affect your ability to perform at work and your career overall. I have yet to speak to a UX engineer who thinks it's a good idea to be both a designer and an engineer. So, and then that's from the engineer side of things, right? And yeah, so it sounds like we're kind of in agreement in that among the developers and the designers that maybe UX should be, for the designers and vice versa. If anything, I might see where it would be really useful for, say, like a UX designer to learn a little bit about development in order to be able to communicate with the engineers that they partner with, and then vice versa for the engineers who are, trying to understand how their designers would like them to, execute the design handoff. So yeah, I think it would be helpful to know a little bit. I don't know if it would be realistic to try to be both, like 100% in each one. So feel free to just, like, for anyone who's thinking about it, feel free to focus on whether you want to be a UX designer or an engineer. You don't have to be both, and don't feel pressured, to try to be both in order to get ahead or anything in your career.
Yeah, years ago, I remember the whole thing was like, oh, should developers design and should designers code? And I'm just like, no, like that doesn't make sense. It's a whole different skill set. And I have met at least one person that I can think of that could do both of them. But what was happening was he was a developer by trade, front end developer, loved it, was, I mean, just an absolute ninja. I mean, so amazing at that. And his designs, when he would hey, Sybil, can you take a look at this? And I'd be like, okay, what does this do? And how do I get from here to there? And so he wasn't making those connections, but it looked beautiful. And it was just like, oh, and the animations were slick, but like from a information architecture perspective, he was missing the boat completely. And it's because he was trying to just show his skill set. And I'm like, I applaud this. And I am, and I would encourage him like, hey, think about this, and this, and how many users have you talked to? Did you do any so I was trying to push him, in other directions. And his thing was like, I just want to code and show the beautiful things I can build. I'm like, okay, that's perfect, because that's what you do for a living. But it was almost like he was not discounting necessarily, but it was almost like so for example, content, like I would say content strategist. Like I've had people, oh, I can write words. I'm like, oh no, content strategy is a lot bigger than that. Don't embarrass yourself. And so I think it's just people, like, if you know, and if you don't, you got to figure out a way to like just kind of gently illustrate to people like, hey, this is a lot bigger than what you're thinking it is on both sides. Because I can write code, not well, but I can do it, and it's terrible, and it'll be a mess, and leave out one comma and everything goes to pot. So I have the utmost respect for developers, and I would never just come in and say like, I could do this, no problem. Like, yeah, but if you're Googling, snippets and just kind of hacking it together, that's not really, to me, what like a really good developer does. But yeah, it's interesting to see the two. But I think too, one thing companies are doing, so someone had mentioned, and I forget who it was, but I feel like a lot of companies are trying to get these, the whole unicorn type of person. And I'm like, you're going to be missing something. I believe those people exist. I have not found one yet in my whole career. So that's why I'm just like, they're out there somewhere. One, you're amazing.
No one.
No,
Just the one.
And I'm going to go ahead and reinforce everything that you've said with the tech side, which is to say that there is not a single person who I have met who is a full stack developer and capable in all those things. you could call me a full stack developer. I've written back end, front end, web, embedded, all, applications, all those things. What am I good at? You know, what
Yeah.
are you hiring me for? It
Yeah.
isn't. I'm
Yeah.
filling in gaps if I'm using some of those other skill sets, right?
Exactly.
And that's, and I think that's a good way to think about it is like, there's the things you're good at, and then there's the things you're capable of. And, you can fill gaps, but it's not necessarily going to be right. And,
And I think that, like the whole unicorn thing, it's like you're telling on yourself. Like unicorns are rare. That's the point. I have a friend who is probably a unicorn. And I've mentioned that because I met her as a UI person, and then she's done some other trainings and done other work and ended up deciding to go more into software engineering, but she can do it all. And I like to mention her because she is the one person I have met who can do it all. She is a true unicorn. And it's okay to not be, I think, because so much of our jobs is working well in teams. And you don't want somebody who is trying to do everything, because the whole point of what we do is that we're working together in teams to build the best experiences and the best products.
Awesome.
I think
Can I
one
ask
thing to say about that is just that one person equals one perspective.
Mm.
And, even if somebody's capable of all those things, if you work in isolation, you might get something that only they understand and can use. Go ahead, Katie.
just to ask a question on this, because, I'm new to this world. I have an interior design background, so I'm very familiar with user experience, user interface, but in a completely, different, I guess, form, more three-dimensional than two-dimensional. So that's why UX UI like really intrigues me, because I feel like it's directly related with my prior experience. But I did a full stack boot camp and, found I could code, HTML, CSS really well. And then, oh, thank you. Yeah. Breath of the Wild. Yeah. I wasn't sure if anyone would get that. It's one of my favorite video games. So when I did the boot camp, it was completely new to me. I've never coded in my life, and found that I did really well with, HTML, CSS. But one of the things when I'm trying to apply for jobs and I'm trying to get my JavaScript skills up, one of the things that I'm finding in that I asked the question about, the whole full stack UX, UI, that whole combo, it's really hard to navigate interviews sometimes when you're speaking to a company to try and ask, I think Stacy, you spoke to this. What are you hiring me for? Like, what is my job? Because again, I feel like we're being asked to be that unicorn because everyone's looking for that. And while I have it on my resume that I, can do these things, that doesn't mean I'm an expert in them. So how would you guys suggest kind of navigating that world and with those types of experiences?
Can I ask a clarifying question? And I don't, because I've never applied for any sort of tech or engineering job. Are they asking you to be like a full stack engineer? Okay, so they're wanting front end, back end.
Yes. Yeah, they're wanting full stack, but they're also wanting you to be able to create layouts and to understand how the user is going to be interacting, and then also create a design, a color scheme, like all the things. I know it was very overwhelming. And granted, this was my first internship. This is my first intro into this world. I'm definitely not comparing this company with everyone else, but it was not what I expected it to be. And to see how the front end developer, see what her day-to-day was, I was like, I don't know if that seems really intense. So it's nice to have y'all on here to kind of get a better perspective of what to actually expect. But again, I just keep seeing this trend over and over. And so I'm just trying to understand, how do I navigate this? And am I being realistic?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things, I'm on my iPad, so I keep seeing the chats just keep pop up, and they're all about money, and that's right. What's going on in part is somebody doesn't want to pay for multiple positions, and they should be hiring for multiple positions. So they better be paying you unbelievable amounts of money. Otherwise, they're just expecting you to do too much work. And so part of that is just job searches can be rough. And sometimes it's a matter of just waiting until you find the right position. Because those I'm seeing run, like there's people, basically they're saying money and red flags, because that's both of what's going on. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is, I think it's really important that you got that training in all of these different skills. I do think it's important, as was brought up in various ways, that, I'm not a software engineer, but I learned enough code to be able to talk to the developers that I work with. And trust me, they like you better when you can start speaking their language a little bit. So, so that's really important. Those skills will not be wasted, whatever you end up being more your speed of what you want to do. So part of what's happening at the early part of your career too is figuring out which of those areas and those skills you want to continue to develop further to be your specialization. You're not locked into it. It's not your forever role, but you are going to kind of gravitate to something as you learn more about it. And so as you're looking for these first roles, see if there are ones that are in areas that you are most like. If you like coding best, look for an engineering role. If you like design best, look for a design role. It doesn't mean you're only ever going to be able to do those things, but starting to specialize. That whole cyclical thing, like some people like, we don't specialize anymore. Like starting to specialize is and getting a flavor of different things as you're figuring out where you want to specialize is an important part of your early career.
Definitely echo that 1000%. Like early design career, I was doing UI and it was terrible and I hated it. Like in the handoff was always like, don't you just understand what I mean? Like, just, and I figured out that what I really love to do is like really research and ask deep questions and sort puzzles and solve problems. So that's where the rubber meets the road for me. But I've also worked with other people that, making it beautiful. They dream about ways to make it beautiful. And I'm like, that's wonderful. I love that for you. That's not my thing. And then too, like, watch out for these companies. They are tricky. They will, that sounds like a beat down getting ready to happen, especially if it's a startup. Well, we're a family. That's nonsense. We can do a whole other talk on that, but we're family. Like, no, we're not. You are not paying any bills at my house. Like, not one. We are not family.
Come to my barbecue. I ain't cooked for you. You didn't give me a gift present.
Talk about it. Yeah, because these companies will really have you like, people, and I've seen people drink the Kool-Aid and I'm like, you ain't tricking Sybil. I already know, like, that's not what you're trying to do. Like, you're trying to pull one over on me. And I've done that. Like, I've done the, hey, I'm on every base type of situation. And it was stressful. And it was like, if I let down any person or department, I took it personal. And so I always tell people, like, early career, it's just like, yeah, they're not your family. Your family is your family, and you got to keep that perspective always. But that's over there. But yeah, that sounds like a beat down waiting to happen. So I'm glad you did run. Good for you. They'll find another person to do that, and it's going to suck for that person in the short term. So
I'm going to add that I see this happen so often, and it breaks my heart because, we all of us who've been in our early careers, I think we can see this coming from a mile away. And it's just like, I want to save everyone who's going through this. Oh my God. And also I want to add that there's always this possibility that they might be underpaying you as a 10 times, rock star unicorn, but then, offering something like way better to like the dude that comes along and actually says like, hey, I am a times 10 like unicorn, give me the times 10 money. So yeah, there's always a possibility that you might be coming up against another person who is getting a better offer for the same stuff you're doing just because they were born with the right set of genitals. But that said, you had asked whether or not how to navigate this sort of thing. This is what I like to tell all people who are starting out. First of all, do not like, if at all possible, do not do work for free, because they see you in your resume and they just automatically think you're going to do stuff for free because you're hungrier than you are, you know, more, that you're more willing to prove yourself than you are to get paid. Not necessarily true, right? We've all got bills. So that said, like, if you're looking for more experience, even, you know, even if it is an internship or something, like, is there a stipend, things like that. And then during internships like this, I would take this opportunity to get your foot, like, you know, kind of dipped in all these different types of jobs that they're having you do, so that you have a better idea of what you want to be doing and don't want to be doing. And then once you have an idea of what it is you really want, know your market worth. I would suggest, you know, checking out levels.fyi, especially if you're interested in learning what your market rates are in, you know, software engineering, development, that sort of thing. And then there's also like other websites for designers, things like that. And then start to learn the language of job descriptions. It might be something that you'll develop with experience and time, but you start to learn what it is they're really looking for and what they're saying that they're not saying in their job descriptions. Like, oh, like, maybe this is not a good company, or hey, maybe this is a really good company, that the person who wrote it actually knows what it is they're doing for a living, and so that therefore they are writing a really good job description because, like, they know exactly what they're looking for, as opposed to the ones who are just like, oh, we need a designer. We just put designer in there. And you probably have seen this, like, we need a UX designer who can also do branding and visual design and animation, and also know, like, the cognitive science and be able to grok our users and, you know, all that stuff. And again, it'll come down to how well you know what it is that you want to be doing. And then after you're able to figure out all those things, you know, what it is you want to do, what your market worth is, and then how to read the job description language, then you're in a better position to navigate through all of those things. I hope that helps.
I'm going to chime in with one quick one that it took me a long time to figure out. And I really only came to terms with this in the last couple of years. Part of adulting hashtag, right? Blame, shame, and guilt are never-ending cycles where we torture ourselves for things outside of our knowledge, capabilities, or control. That's quote I came myself for myself, so quoting myself, but that's, you know, when we talk about fulfilling all of those areas, you can't. It's outside of your knowledge, your capabilities, and your control. And so we put pressure on ourselves and we strive and strive and strive, but it's unrealistic. And so then it can cause this whole downturn where you might even go, you know, screw this noise, I'm out, right? And, you know, leave something that you're really loving and passionate about. So just, you know, be careful with your choices. Remember, it's a job. You can always walk away.
Good perspective.
Sorry to make it dark. What did anybody else have any questions they wanted to get in before we kind of move to some other areas?
Arnaldo has a really good question in the chat.
I want to make the transition from front-end development into UX and UI design. Where do I start? Which courses, boot camps should I take?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. So on my team right now, there is one person that went to a boot camp, and the name of the boot camp escapes me. It'll come back around in my brain, but he came in Now, granted, he was switching from being like I think a barista. It was some random thing that he did, but he is such a phenomenal storyteller. And he is really, really phenomenal at digging in with people and understanding what makes them tick. It's just a skill that he has. Oh man, it'll come to me. And I'm not trying to endorse anybody. No one's paying for that endorsement, but it'll come to me. He went to a boot camp. I've known other people that have gone to grad school. So it depends on your situation, like where you're at in life and what you're trying to do. There's plenty of boot camps out there. And I would say, I mean, you get what you pay for. Because I've seen some other boot campers come out, and man, it's going to come to me. And when it does, I'm going to kick myself for not remembering it. But I've seen other boot campers come out of their experience, and I've looked at their portfolios, and I'm just like, they don't even make it past the front door. I'm just like, thank you for your time, but this is not necessarily what we're looking for. And then as far as courses, I feel like if you got the drive and the determination, there's so many online courses you can take, and you can get a masterful education in user experience if you know where to look. Like I can't vouch for Google. I know that they've got like a certification course for UXers. I've never taken it, and I haven't hired anybody that's taken it. But I know it's out there. It's free. It's on the internet. I mean, there's tons of, I mean, for me, what I did was I did go to grad school personally, just because of where I wanted to go in my career. I knew I needed some financial business acumen, that type of stuff. So that's why I did what I did. But I was in a very different place than some folks. So I always tell people, like, look at your situation, figure out what's best for you, because there's a million different ways. I mean, Udemy, there's a million different ways to get into it. I would say the most important thing is going to be like doing what you're doing now. Go to these talks, have conversations, talk with people. For me, when I was working in the agency world, and I was more in a technical capacity at the time, there was a UX designer that we hired that was kind enough to take me under her wing. She took me to a couple of usability studies, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's like you're a talk show host and you're interviewing these people and finding out what makes them tick. And I just was so impressed and so blown away by her that I was like, this is what I want to do. And so that's when I changed careers. So I would say that's going to be probably the quickest, cheapest way, is find designers, talk to people that actually do it, figure out what companies are like doing really good design work, not just having designers internally. So, there may be some companies that you might not necessarily want to work at. But I'm assuming like Google has amazing designers. That's my assumption. I've talked to Google designers, and depending on what team you're working on, it's fantastic or it's terrible. It just depends. And so that's kind of how I did. So I had a very informal education in the beginning, when I was just kind of meeting people and having conversations and just having people look at different things that I would do and look at different designs that I made, and they were bad. Like I mean, oh my God, so bad. But it was, I just kept pushing and just, that tenacity, grit, and just kind of really pushing, because if that's what you want to do, you'll find a way. And there's tons of different ways to break in. I'd say there's not one path that works for everybody. You got to find what works for you and really lean in and make it your second job for a hot second. Like make it your hustle. Like do that on the side as you're building your skills. And because the best way to learn is to do it. Best way to learn.
And I definitely agree with talking to designers. And one of the questions to ask them is, how did you get into UX? Because a lot, like the going from developer to UX is not uncommon at all. And so though you can find other people who made that transition and ask them how they did it. You can talk to people who made different choices. Like I'm in a situation where I'm met someone who asked me about my experience, because I also did grad school and I teach grad school now. So I teach information architecture in a grad program now. So that's me, right? Like I am a very, like, give me a book, give me a lecture, like all that. That's how I learned. But a lot of people, I have a friend who's like, well, can you give me a TED Talk? And it's not because she's trying to get out of reading. It's just because she knows that her way of acquiring information, she really does want a video or to sit down and somebody walk her through something, because that is how she's going to acquire the information. If I give her a book, she might read it, doesn't mean she's going to get the information from it. It's just not her learning style. So that's really important too. Understanding how you learn, what your budget is, because going to grad school is expensive. Going to a boot camp can be expensive. So I have a lot of friends who did General Assembly, for example. And then understanding that whatever you choose to do as you're doing that part of the transition, it's a beginning, it's not the ending. A lot of people come out of boot camps expecting senior roles. You are not going to get a senior role out of a boot camp, but you're not going to get a senior role out of a grad program either. Like, you know, I have a master's degree in human computer interaction, and I started in junior roles as well. So that's part of it too, is that's part of a process. And then understand that your experience as a developer is amazing. You have so much to bring to the table. Like, you understand how things work. Developers always have really good ideas. Like, why aren't we doing X, Y, Z? So every time you've had that thought on something that you've built, think about how you would communicate what you think would be that improvement, in terms of sketching, in terms of making the case for making that improvement, in terms of evangelizing the problem, because that's a huge part of what UX is as well. So you have lots of opportunities to practice even in the things that you're already doing. You know, get into the mindset of what you're working on, how would you think about it as a UX person? And that'll get you started as well. Another thing I wanted to point out, so somebody mentioned Coursera in the chat. There's platforms like Treehouse, which are self-directed lessons as well. There's so much, I can start listing books because that's my thing. But there's so much out there to learn from. Talk to people like myself who've made a career change. Talk to people who've taken your path. Talk from developer to UX, and then talk to people who've taken different paths, because that might help you out too. But like, communication and curiosity, those are gonna be great skills in a career change, and they're essential skills for being a UXer.
I also want to add, Arnaldo, you mentioned that you want to make a transition from front-end dev to UX UI. Are you currently employed somewhere where you might even be able to ask your manager if you could start, you know, taking on a few more, you know, parts in your project where you might be able to do a little bit more UX UI? So that way you're learning on the job, and you get to put that on your resume, and you're already getting paid to do UX UI without, you know, the so-called UX UI experience. And for everyone else who's also similarly in Arnaldo's position, when getting into, like, when trying to transition into UX UI, I would always recommend finding a way within your own organization, if you can actually start taking on those responsibilities. And then along the way, if you also want to, like, supplement your on the job, you know, learning with boot camps and courses, I think like, I would recommend courses and boot camps in conjunction with learning on the job. A lot of people who want to break in, they ask me, you know, like, which courses and boot camps will get me, you know, my first job. And the reality of it is I think the statistics were saying something that only 30 to 33% of people actually do get a job out of a boot camp. You're more likely to get a job right out of boot camp if you already have some similar or like tech adjacent experience, like in this case, front end development. For everyone else who is coming in pretty cold, it will take a few more like jobs until you get in one that has like UX UI design in the title. So yeah, going back to Arnaldo, yeah, I would see if there's some ways, you know, in your own organization where you can start, you know, getting some of those UX UI responsibilities, and then just tell everyone in there, like, hey, I'm interested in UX UI. So that way, even if they don't have anything available at the time, they're going to hear it from you so much that when something does come up, they'll immediately say, oh, right, Arnaldo asked about that before. And then they'll just like suggest it to you. Yeah, and then I guess just keep studying and do your boot camps on the side, and you can transition into UX UI like pretty fast.
I did want to bring a thing up that you know, we've talked about human-computer interaction and cognitive science, and these are very specific terms around user experience design. And I was wondering if y'all wouldn't mind taking a little crack at it in terms of what does that mean, and what are some of the implications of that? Like, how does, like, ooh, science, brain, what? So go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. I would say that human-computer interaction is just basically the study of the relationship between the human, the end user, and the computer. So like when you're trying to use a computer to surf the web, use an application, or technically a smartphone is a small computer. So I would put this also in the categories. Like if you're using an app on your phone. I think that's the simplest way I could put it. And what was the other part of the question, Stacy?
Cognitive science and what that actually relates to in user experience design.
Ooh, okay. In my experience, I would say that you can't really have user experience without cognitive science. That said, I would list that in the list of essential skill sets if you want to get into UX. Cognitive science is going to help you make the design decisions that will best serve your users in terms of how to make it user friendly, because you're thinking in terms of how the user's brain might work and how it will apply to interacting with a screen. And then just even the things that would motivate your user to press certain buttons and things like that, and continue to come back to your app. Like I can't think of any instance in which I've ever worked in UX without using cognitive science. It definitely goes hand in hand there. And if you are really serious about getting into UX, I would say that you would at least have an interest in cognitive science and being able to apply have your design decisions shaped by what you know of cognitive science.
And some of the information you might get about cognitive science might not be called cognitive science, right? So one of my favorite classes I took in grad school was called information seeking behavior. And we talked a lot about cognitive science things in that, but it wasn't necessarily a cognitive science class. Another really important thing about cognitive science is you're also learning, when you learn about things like motivation and mental models and all the other kinds of things that you'll hear UXers talk about, you're also learning how to be responsible with those things. So I'm thinking about things like cognitive science is directly related to things like dark patterns and people buying things or doing things that they wouldn't normally do if, quite frankly, the designer had manipulated them into doing it. And it's your responsibility as an ethical designer to avoid those things. And sometimes that means you have to speak up against them when people suggest them. Like, no, we're not doing this. But it all goes hand in hand in terms of things like cognitive science and human-computer interaction. And one of the things that was starting to be popular when I was in grad school and another one of those waxing and waning things is some people believe we should change it to human information interaction, that the computer is the interface, but really what we're talking about is how people interact with information, how people process it, how people use it. And that's the real essence of the discipline, is that we are mediators for the wealth of information that's out there in the world.
And I love that someone put in there UX for good. Definitely agree with you on that. So there's a couple of folks that I have not studied, that's not the right way to put that, but that I'm aware of that have impacted the work. So one is Dan Ariely, and he is just freaking genius. Behavioral economics, cognitive psychology, just a smart guy. And so a couple of years ago, I was working on a product. This is when I was still in IC, and we had that whole thing about like just the behavioral economics of like opting out of an experience versus opting into an experience. And so if you've ever come across a UI where you're automatically checked and it says, yes, I accept, I want to get all this marketing email, and you have to take the actual action to remove that, then you're seeing a little bit of Dan Ariely's work in play. Another person that's a really, really good person to kind of follow in this field is Nir Eyal, and he has that book out there. You've probably heard of it, called Hooked. And it's all about, like, when you think about Instagram and how Instagram works and why it's so doggone addictive. These engineers in Silicon Valley, they know this. They're not idiots. This is engineered to have you hooked all day. If you check and see, so my phone will tell me how many times I pick her up in a day, and it's embarrassing. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, this is horrible. That is absolutely on purpose. And that is cognitive science, behavioral economics, like all of that stuff kind of mixed together. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert in any of those, but we've all had our lives affected. And you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. And there's plenty of documentaries on Netflix that you could see, or watch that talk about, just like the addiction of like social media. And that is all engineered, is not by accident. Works similar to the way, I'm not a gambler, but if you've ever been to Vegas and you've done the slot machines, if you look around the room, there's a whole lot of science that went into that. Guess what? There's no windows on purpose. So you can't tell what time it is. You'll win a little, but you're not going to win a lot, because that little win keeps you going and it feels like it's a small investment. So guess what? I'm going to keep, dropping my little quarters or dollars or however much the slot machines cost. Like, all of that is very much intentional. It's very much using science and behavior and trying to change behavior. So if you've got a bad habit that you're trying to break, or a habit that you're trying to make, it's difficult to do. And so you can game the system and do some cognitive science on your own self to try and get yourself to do it. But I will admit, candidly, that, changing behaviors for me it's difficult, and it's difficult for most people, but you can lean into, the work that they've done and really understand how you can take user experience and change people's behaviors for the better. And so I am always a fan of, like, let's learn more and let's be lifelong learners. But then too, it's just like, UX for good, code for good, don't be evil. All of those slogans definitely need to be kept in mind when you're doing this work, because you've got to be ethical about it. So I'm going to get off that soapbox, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm also going to add that at some point you might, have an employer that tries to pressure you into manipulating your users. Yeah. I recently just spoke to an old colleague of mine who he went into a startup company that's helping people write out their own resumes and make it so that recruiters will read them and everything like that. But the founder was telling him, like, every other day, like, why don't you, make the cancel button a little smaller, or like, let's change it so that they can't even cancel. You have to call in. But then there's no place where that number is listed, so they have to go searching for it. And it's going to be tough, because you might think that you're going to have to do all this horrible stuff in order to get that paycheck. And I guess no judgment here, because if you need that paycheck, that can be pretty tough. But then on the other hand, it might be reassuring to remember that as the UX designer, you're also the advocate for the user. You're in a unique position to know, what the user needs in order to just do the things that you're trying to get them to do anyway. And that there's ways to have the business goal and the user's goals also be the same thing. So when you're, if you're ever faced with a predicament like this, I would suggest trying to push back and bring your data with you and try to find ways to convince your employer to see that there might be another way to get the users to want to do what the business wants them to do.
Yeah.
I think kind of this leads into the next little question here, and I'll go ahead and preface that anytime I start to get a little bit like, ooh, this doesn't feel right, or it doesn't look right, or it just, that's when my first response is, if I can't immediately identify it, then I'm like, designer time, right? Like, take it to somebody who's an expert in this area. But to that effect, what are some ways that developers, product managers, and folks who help just work in tech in various capacities can educate themselves on user experience best practices, and kind of be advocates for UX design as a more holistic practice brought into the workplace?
That's a heavy hitter. Ooh. Well, so for me, what I've found that works really well, there's always one or two people that are not designers that will champion design because maybe they've worked in a place where design was, had more of, respect isn't the right word, but was more prominent or more part of the conversation. And I have not figured out how to make that. Like how to get engineers to care about certain things like that. But there are engineers that absolutely do care about it. And so what I do is like, I will, as a person that's in a leadership role, I will highlight that company-wide. We're going to talk about how awesome, whoever is like, oh, Pat, that was amazing. I love what you did. Let's have a whole talk about it for the whole company. Like I will highlight that behavior. I will highlight the crap out of it. So, being on the leadership team does have its perks in that regard because, it's like we can highlight good behavior and reward good behavior in such a way that's good for their career. It's a win-win all the way around. And so I mean, I don't know if that's cheating or what, but it's just working smarter, I guess. And then from engineering perspective, I'd say there's definitely folks that I have worked with in the past that had a passion for it. And then they are the champion on the engineering team. So they'll get that spark and then they'll bring that back to the team and they'll kind of let that spread throughout the team. And they may even rally, especially if they're a leader on the team. Like they don't have to be in a leadership position to be a leader. But if they're in that position where they can get people like, hey, like, let's rally, let's swarm this for just like, a little bit of time and there's big rewards. I am not above bribing people with pizza and snacks and all the good things. Like I'm not above it, never have been, never will be. It works well. But I definitely want to appreciate people for the work that they do. And when they contribute and they go above and beyond, like I am, even when I was an individual contributor, like I would find ways to say thank you. Like maybe your company has a kudos system or a spotlight award system, especially if it's tied to money. It's like, let me slide you a $50 thank you because I appreciate you. Like who wouldn't want that? And it works for all disciplines and all like even the legal team. I don't try and bribe them because they ain't having it. But for the most part, it's just like, hey, I just want to give a shout out whenever, I'll give shout outs. I'll send recognition awards, I'll do all those types of things. And then bringing people along the journey. So a couple of years ago, I put together a training it wasn't even a boot camp. It was just like a 3-day training. And we made it cross-functional. It was like, we're going to invite tech, we're going to invite product, we're going to invite all the different teams. And so they got to, and this was during COVID. So people were really craving that connection. And so we did the training, it was remote. And so it was just like, hey, you're going to take 3 days and you're not going to have to write a stitch of code. You can come in here and exercise your creative muscles. We brought in a third party from outside. And I mean, it was so well received because people that wanted to, for example, do design, and they didn't really know how to break into that. So kind of opened that up to the company and invited, a cross-functional group of people and just had like a really awesome 3-day boot camp of training with this group. So I would say it's just like, show the appreciation, find your advocates because they're there. Like I've not been in any company where every developer was like, oh, design sucks, I don't want to work with you guys. Like there's always one or two. And then just foster that relationship and continue to build that relationship and see if they can, recruit some of their buddies to come, work and help with the team. I think that's probably worked best for me. And I know there's probably, a ton of other ideas, but I'm all for like supplementing a swarm with pizza and beer if I need to. We ain't above it, not at all. So that's what's worked for me.
I'm going to add on, I'm going to definitely second the whole develop those relationships and then shout each other out. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. Like, it's so much easier to work with folks when you have made those connections. Like, I remember when I first met Stacy in person, it was great. You know, like, we were on the same team, but we weren't co-located. So having those moments of being able to really get to know each other as people is really important. And then if you are in a position to champion design and you've noticed that design is, I've been in situations where the designers are left off of the, yay, we launched X, and UX is not included. And I've been in situations where the product person who might be writing that email or the VP who might be writing that email or whatever, make sure to include the designers and those thank yous. Let me tell you what I prefer in terms of that situation. But do it the other way around too. Like, I've been in design workshops and I've had to fight for this, but they've gone better when I've been able to include developers on those workshops. And they should be in the workshops. They know so much that other people don't know. And so, you know, if you're doing cross-functional work, like it's great if you've got, you know, product folks at the table and you're working on a workshop, but fight to have developers at the table too, at the design point of the process, so that, you know, they will also maybe be more inclined to include design when it's time to do, you know, QA checks and things like that before things launch. So it's definitely about building those relationships on your team and then being really respectful. We talked at the beginning a lot about these different areas of expertise and how we're a team and we work together. Being respectful of that and really doing it as a team and knowing that we're all helping each other together build the best products.
I'm gonna go ahead and kind of champion a little bit on Candra there, because you know, a thing that we worked on ended up becoming an entire like redo for the company, and it started with just the conversations about mobile, and then it became an entire company rebrand, and all of these influential decisions that we made in terms of like user experience, I say collectively, like it was her, but you know, it's so amazing when you come in and, you know, I'll throw another like random one, right? Like, we hadn't touched text as part of this like kind of initial rebrand, and I was like, this is Jake. And I came to Conrad and Jeremy and was like, y'all, this is Jake. What are we gonna do to fix this? And then like as a total side project, ended up redoing all the text and text inputs in this entire application by myself. See my earlier quote of blame, shame, and guilt. But learnings of the past. But you know, it's that involvement, that partnership, changes everything. Changes everything. So, you know, even if you don't know, you know when something's not right. Right? And, you know, a little bit of pride and work in exactly the worst thing either, because you're not delivering independently, you're delivering as a team. And UX is absolutely cornerstone to that delivery. That user experience, you don't have an experience. Go ahead, Emily. You had a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. We've talked about how UXers interact with different people across the organization, talked about how they interact with engineers, kind of gone through the full spectrum, and then the spectrum of like UI to UX, touched a little bit on how UX and product interact. Though I hope we can circle back to that a little bit because I have some other questions, but I feel like we're missing a huge interaction, and that's how do you interact with your users? What are you doing in terms of user testing, user research? What tools are you using there? How often are you talking to your users? Do you actually talk to your users? What does that look like?
That is such a complicated question that we should have an entire talk about. But the short version is you need to talk to your users for sure. And so right now, especially in the COVID era, doing a lot of remote usability testing, and there's a lot of tools for that. There are different platforms like usertesting.com, UserZoom, Userlytics. There's a bunch of them, which there's also, I'm going to shout out a group called Nobility as well, which provides panels of users with disabilities to do usability tests through UserZoom. But there's a lot of options for remote testing. In-person testing is wonderful, and if circumstances allow it. And there's different kinds of research. At what point there's the stuff you do before any kind of design decisions or any kind of product decisions get made. Unfortunately, a lot of times, in my experience, UX is not involved in that. It depends on how things are set up at a company, because you might have a research department that we might not be even aware of. I have had that happen. There might be, there's a difference between market research and UX research, but people might go with the market research. Understandably, I really like what Clara has said throughout about the importance of business needs. Business needs and business goals are really important. And you are balancing user needs with those business goals as well. So a lot of it, I've done guerrilla testing, which is when you, again, this is pre-COVID, but actually taking designs to a coffee shop. We will buy your coffee, take a look at these designs. You can get a lot of information spending an afternoon in a coffee shop, bugging people to come over and look at your designs. So there's the takeaway is, when you talk to users, ideally it's at all points. It's before you start designing, it's while you're designing, it's after you've launched, and throughout the whole recursive way that we do things. And then you also want to talk about different kinds of research. So the generative exploratory stuff that you're doing before you decide your yearly roadmap or whatever is a different kind of research than the tactical usability studies that you should be doing with new features and new designs. So a lot of that is also just familiarizing yourself with the different kinds of research that are out there and understanding when to apply which options.
I'm going to second all that stuff that was just said by Candra. Yeah, it's very important to always be in touch with your users throughout the entire design process and entire cycle. And yeah, sometimes the designers don't actually get to do the user research. I know that I've been in situations where maybe there wasn't a dedicated UXR department, or we didn't have any researchers. So then you end up having to wear that hat. And then if that's the case, yeah, it would be really important to learn about the different kinds of user testing, not just to make it more efficient to gather data from your users, but just to also ask the questions you want in the right way, so that you can eliminate any chances you're leading them on to give the answers that you want. I find in my experience, though, that it's better for the designer to actually not be involved in the user research. It allows for that extra buffer between you and your users so that you're not injecting your own design biases into it. And then you're not ultimately subconsciously designing for yourself. And then also UXR, user research, has a different set of skills, separate from design, where it's a lot more heavily into psychology. We have a user researcher now. That's exactly what she wants to do. And she went in, she just graduated with a master's from psychology. And if you were ever to ask her, what goes into user research, she can go far more into depth to it than maybe a designer would. Again, the T-shaped skill set applies here. So yeah, so there might be reasons why designers aren't involved in the process of speaking to users, but it is imperative that you are in touch with your users in some way throughout the entire process, whether it's through your user researchers or whether you are the designer/researcher as well.
Yeah, and I'll definitely echo everything you said. I'm definitely the type of person, I'm going to talk to users, because I mean, we build tax software. Everybody does taxes, I hope. And so my user is everywhere. So I can have a conversation, whether it's at the dinner table or at Starbucks or what have you. And I definitely encourage my team to go out and talk to users. Now, where we do get tripped up, and this there might not be some agreement here, but when it comes to learning from users and doing research, we are at the place now where we are evolving. I'm trying to evolve our team because we have 2 researchers, and then the rest of the team is UX designers, content folks, et cetera. And what's happening is we're getting to a place where if anybody needs a usability test, which that's 90% of what it's bad habits that's been built, but that's 90% of what the requests are. I'm like, you realize this is a whole entire doctor. She is a trained PhD anthropologist / sociologist, and you want her to do usability. That's the wrong skill set. And so it's kind of like bringing a cannon to a water gun fight. And so what I've been talking to, trying to get our company to understand is like, everybody should be learning from customers in our situation. That might not necessarily work for everybody. Like if you're building, medical software, like maybe it might be harder to find your users. But for us, everybody is a taxpayer, essentially. Everybody can learn from users, and we've got to break the habit of thinking that only researchers can do research. In my situation, it's different in different companies. When I was at Chase, only researchers did research. I was slapped on the wrist a couple of times for trying to go talk to people. They're like, you do not show prototypes. You do not test. That's what we have, a whole entire research infrastructure, point taken. But it's when I think about talking to users, like it's been such an integral part of my design career that even when I was a designer, we didn't have researchers. I did my own research. I had to. It was imperative to do that. And we did it in an iterative fashion. And so, when I look at my team and I'm trying to kind of bifurcate the concepts of learning, everybody can do. Let's democratize that. Everybody go out there. We're going to teach you how to fish. We'll coach you. We'll train you. We'll get you to a good place. And researchers, those are going to be focused more on the long-term questions, the big questions, like what do people think about money? Well, you can't answer that in one study. You're going to have to do multiple studies over, time. And what do you think about like 1099Ks? Like, not to get all nerdy about the tax stuff, but what do people think about that? Because that's going to be a new field and a new area that I think is going to trip a lot of people up this season. So the field is ripe for learning in that regard. And if I have, this powerhouse that's doing usability tests to see which button works best, that's such a waste of time for her. In this situation. Again, I want to be very clear. This is something we're adapting for our situation, so it might not apply across the board. But products managers should absolutely be able to find, users on tap and say Tuesday at 1 o'clock, every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we're going to have an hour-long conversation with somebody that uses our software. That's just a conversation. That's not research. And what we've gotten to the place of doing is and I'm not pointing my finger at y'all, but we've gotten to the place where, we need research, call the researcher. She's got to do this for us. I'm like, no, she doesn't. You can go learn on your own. And matter of fact, shame on you if you're not. And that is something I will stand behind. That is a soapbox I will beat the heck out of, because it's just I feel like, and please, if you disagree with me, that's totally okay. I'm okay with that. But I feel like people have gotten lazy and they're just like, oh, that's the researcher's job. They'll answer all the questions. I'm like, it's your product. You're building this. Like, you have got to get in there and get knee deep in it, not just, I'm going to throw this over the fence in a waterfall style, fashion and wait for answers to come back. Now, granted, our team is smaller, so we do not have the luxury of having a full, center of excellence around research. So that's kind of why you hear this passion, because it's a fight that I've been fighting on the back end for several months now. So that's where all that passion is coming from. But yeah, I talk to users all the time. There's always something to be learned, and there's always a surprise to be uncovered. So that's my 2 cents on that. Apologies for the passion there.
Oh, I also think there's a balance, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of what's being spoken to in both cases in terms of whether or not you believe designers should be doing direct research or not, is that research is, as all these other things are, a discipline. And there are things that you need to learn. Like, if you are running your own usability studies, ways to avoid some of that bias, ways to write questions that aren't leading. Like, the sheer number of questions I've rewritten for people, because like, we are not asking this in this way.
Do you like this? Do you like the button? It's like, might not reword that.
Right? Or like, your
I have
prototyping software, you don't take the hints, the masking where to click off, and then people are actually testing with that. I'm like, no. So like stuff like that. You know, learning those things, and that split of, you know, people on the design team are running the tactical usability tests, and your powerhouse researchers are running the generative tests. I've seen that split before. It works really well. I've also seen the powerhouse researchers do a lot of training of the people to make sure that those tactical usability tests are good tests. And they have to, I've been in situations where your dedicated researchers had to sign off on tests before they were run. And they also helped train and model people on how to report those, because there's a lot of damage that can happen in a usability report in terms of expectations. Like if you are just testing to see if people can find a given button and click it, and then somehow that test has become a roadmap item about some other thing that has nothing to do with that button, that happens a lot too. And so trying to make sure that doesn't go down. But this, I mean, it goes back to a lot of the things we've been talking about in terms of, we work in teams. We have these disciplines that are actual disciplines that have a lot of learning. We are part of a larger organizational structure. You know, I don't mind if I'm not the one doing the study, but it's nice to be able to observe some of the tests, for example. So like, let's say you have a dedicated research team that's doing, especially if you can do it in person and has the room and people can watch remotely and all that kind of stuff. It's really great to have the opportunity to even observe some of the tests that you're not a part of. It's nice to have access to reports if you're working on something. Like a lot of times you might have a separate research team in your organizational structure, but people are referencing research that you never get to see as a designer. That's a problem. So like just making sure those lines of communication are open. So like even if it is a marketing study, and marketing studies are different than user experience research studies, but even getting to see those marketing studies instead of being told, oh, well, the marketing study says this, so you should do it this way. I'm like, no, there's any problems with that statement. Just having those relationships with all these different folks in your organization and understanding the why of that. And somebody asked about different kinds of research. We really don't have time to go into all of that, but just, you know, understanding that there are different kinds of research and that there are different kinds of tests, and that there are different ways of validating those tests. And there are different circumstances. Like sometimes people want to throw a certain kind of test at a problem. People love to throw surveys at, why aren't people clicking on this? Let's do a survey. I'm like, why do you think that somebody's going to not click on it and then do a survey to tell you why they didn't click on it? Like, you're not going to get that answer that you think that you're going to get. So like helping people understand that kind of thing too. It's huge, and it's ideal when you can have dedicated researchers do that, but you might be, as the UX practitioner, the person who's advocating for some of that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, totally agree with that. And I love the idea of a player coach. So that's how I want research, again, in our situation, smaller company, smaller team, that's what I'm wanting. I want them to teach the team to fish versus actually doing all the fishing themselves. So, because that's, I feel like where we kind of get hung up. And I'm like, why would you bring this whole entire doctor to test and see if this is the right button? I'm like, anybody can, well, you know, within reason, like anybody that's trained and has like, you know, even a beginner level of usability, because there are definitely, like, I can remember the first time I did talk to a user and did research, it was horrible. No one prepared me. I wasn't ready. The researcher that I was working with was just a designer that liked to do research and talk to customers. And so it was literally, you know, I came into work, I'm there, it's like, you know, third week, hey, we're gonna have customers in today. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to observe. No, you're actually gonna be doing the test today. I'm like, what? I'm like, I didn't write a script and I don't have anything. Oh no, it's just a conversation. Just go in there and figure it out. And I'm like, do you like this design? Do you like this one? Which one do you like better? Like that was what it was. And it was not awesome. And I found years ago, there was a IDOU, they have this video, it's just floating around on the internet. It's old. video, and it's just these two ladies talking, and they're basically having a conversation about how to do good observation. I've shared that video with more people, and I'll dig it up here in a second, but I've shared that video with more people just to help them understand, like, okay, because what they do is they illustrate, like, this is a leading question, and they demonstrate to people, and I'm like, this is perfect. This is a base level understanding for how people can just get started in it. And I've worked in places where we had dedicated researchers, dedicated research teams, and I've worked in places where it's just kind of like everybody's there, every man for themselves. And so, it's interesting to see where people are in that maturity level, and the results that you get in the product as a result of that. So yeah, tons of different ways, but let me see if I can find that video. I'm here, but I'm going to find that video right now because it's so good. Oh, I didn't mean wait for me. I'm going to go to YouTube. Sorry, I hope you guys weren't waiting for me, but yeah, I'm digging it up right now, I promise.
I'm kind of interested. Y'all have talked about some of your skill sets and all of those kinds of things, but like, what is the kind of work that just makes you go yes every morning? And what have you chosen to specialize in? I think that how you talk about your passions can just be incredibly enlightening. So what are, like, it doesn't have to be just one. We're not we are all individuals with various things, and they change over time. But I'm just interested to know.
Well, so my current title is user experience architect, and I think that's a good title because I love the information architecture side of things. I like the structural side. I like making sure things are findable. I like making sure that people can complete the tasks that they're trying to complete. I feel like that overlaps with a lot of things. Like I do prototyping, I do usability tests. I can do the bigger generative tests, but right now I'm in a not so much a researcher role, and so I'm not doing those tests as part of my work. But the thing that made me laugh about your question is, like, the first answer that pops in my head is, I love designing forms. I love it. I love designing forms. Like, it's such an interesting user experience thing. It has so much of all the stuff that we were talking about. There's a whole philosophy about form design that thinks about forms as conversation, balancing. It's a great example of when you balance business needs with user needs. It's an accessibility. Somebody asked about accessibility in the chat, and I really wanted to also emphasize that that's a huge question. Somebody asked about how do you get your place of work on board with usability. The most important thing is it's foundational. You can't do it as an add-on later. And form design is a really good example of that. The way you design the forms from the wireframes on will help with that. Developers own so much of what makes something usable and accessible in terms of how the code is written, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, if I look back at a lot of the projects I've really had a good time with, like, I loved doing CCPA compliance. I loved it. It was a great project. I got to work with the lawyers who were great. I got to work directly with the developers because we didn't have time to not talk to each other. The rules were changing every day. And they're like, well, there's been this point of clarification, so we need to make sure that we cover this, et cetera, et cetera. It was so much fun, and it shouldn't have been fun. It was just like this, really heavily involved with legal requirements thing, and I'm making a form, but I'm like, this is the most fun I've had at this job forever. Just really enjoyed it. And so I think that forms are really good in terms of understanding what goals people are trying to accomplish, understanding why the business needs it, really getting to talk to the different stakeholders in the process. Ideally, you use a test your forms by having people actually fill them out and seeing where the roadblocks are. Things like that they're just a wonderful example of when you get it right, there's a good sense of accomplishment. So I think I fully get to call myself a UX nerd by saying I love making forms.
I think for me, it's not any particular aspect, but I just, and you'll probably see my bias here from earlier. I can really geek out on like user psychology, but also like adjacent to that is also the psychology that goes into partnering with people who are not designers. Like I said, like I can totally geek out on just learning about all the different motivations and the fears and goals of our users, and then, you know, building some sort of user experience or user flow or anything really. And then finding out later in the feedback that there was something that we totally didn't even plan for. And then our users found a really creative way to use it, use what we've built for them. It's so fun to see what they do with it without us telling them how to do it. And then sometimes it comes out way better than, you know, what we had. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is exactly what we meant to do. And then sometimes it's like, oh, okay, so this is a blind spot that we had. How can we, you know, address this now in future iterations? And then when it comes to also having to partner with people who are working on the same project, who aren't necessarily designers, like devs, you know, your marketing sometimes, your PMs, everything. In my experience, and I'll say this as well for anyone else, if you really want to be good at your job, you also have to be able to be good at how to tell other people stuff that might not necessarily make sense to them because they don't have a design background, and then somehow get them to understand it. That in itself is a whole challenge, and because at least in my experience, the key to doing it well, to communicating across platform, is to speak in a language that they understand, and to also know their motivation. So like case in point, like when I'm speaking to a dev, you know, trying to explain to them the design decisions that I had in mind and how I would like this to be built and things, it's good to know that, you know, one of their leading motivations or biggest concerns would be, okay, well, how much work is this going to take? If I take that same, you know, proposal for the same design to say, let's say our CEO, he might say something different. His concern would be, what will this do for our revenue or our bottom line or whatever? Actually, no, advertisement. If I go to advertisement, that's what they would say. Like, what will this do for our revenue? So it's always good to you know, get to know your partners really well, and then, you know, study the things that you need in order to speak their language. For front end devs, I actually took a few courses in code, and again, it's not to be, you know, the 10 times unicorn rock star, full stack, whatever. It's just so that I could speak enough about design from a programmer's point of view in order to explain to them what I meant with all of this visual stuff or all this like wireframing stuff. And then also, yeah, I actually took some courses, you know, in business analysis, just so that I could speak the same jargon to people who are in the business department. So yeah, and again, like they'll also give you feedback as well that is just as fascinating as the users who reveal your blind spots. Yeah, so as you can see, I'm very biased when I say cognitive science is like, you can't have UX without that, because in my experience, yeah, it's definitely really exciting and then also very useful. Anyway, I'll keep it at that.
1000% endorse that and agree with that. And same thing, just working with other people that may not necessarily be designers. So Stacy, you probably remember just the project we did when we went to Portland with the team. It was bringing everybody together. And what was so exciting to me was watching people that aren't necessarily designers get excited about delivering. Like I remember at one point, you know, I'm in the room, I'm talking to users at the time, and the team, the developers and the folks were in the back, the architect, and they were just like, and for me to walk into that and see them just like huddled, like, I mean, I was giddy that whole week. I was just beside myself with excitement, because it was just like, these people, we're talking to users, they're listening, they're getting excited, they're making changes on the fly. I mean, I think, you know, Stacy, like, I don't know what all y'all were doing while I was out there talking to users, but every time I would come back in the room, the group was huddled. And I mean, it just made my little designer heart so happy. Like I was just smiling ear from ear, like ear to ear, because it was like bringing people together around the power of user input and user feedback. It was tremendous. And I mean, nothing kind of lights me up like that, because it's so fun for people to, for people that might not necessarily, that might not be their day to day, but they get it and they see it. And when they see people use the product and they're hacking their way through the system, can't tell you how many times I've had to hold back products managers and developers from saying they're using it wrong. I'm like, no. This is what we put in front of them. This is the design. I'm like, they're not using it wrong. They're using it absolutely right. And if we want them to use it in a different way, we need to build it in a different way. So loved all of that. And, you know, I've done that, you know, basically at every company I've worked at. And I remember one time we went to, we were at an office, it was an accounting team's office, and I brought the developer, no, it was two developers, two product managers, two developers. And so I sat down with the user and I was like, hey, we're gonna, you know, get in here and we're gonna, you know, use the product. And so, you know, I had them, you know, okay, this is the task. Just imagine, you know, you're doing X, Y, Z, go ahead and complete the task. And so they did the task, and they didn't use it how it was brought to life in code. Let's put it that way. They were using it in a way that made sense for them. And the other thing that was really important for the products managers and the developers to see was, this is not their all-day destination. People don't love this thing like you do. That you spend 8 hours a day in this place. They spend maybe 2 minutes. If the information is not there and readily available to do what they need to do, they're going to move on. They're going to hack the system. So that was probably one of those moments where it was just, you know, watching the products managers cringe. Was beautiful to me. Like, I was like, yes, now you see what we're saying, like why we need to spend more time with this. And, you know, having developers and engineers and folks just be in a room and make decisions. I don't know, I might be dating myself, but if any of y'all remember Lotus Notes, that was probably developed by a developer. Sorry, what?
Lotus 1, 2, 3, and
God.
Maple teaches.
Holy God. I mean, terrible. Like I found a screenshot of Lotus Notes, which was the predecessor to Outlook. My God, I'm like, who even? And it probably made complete and total sense to an engineer. Probably made complete total sense. Like, yeah, this is how you do it. And so to watch people kind of hack their way through the system that we had just built and designed without getting any customer input, it was such like, oh my God, it was so amazing to just watch everybody in the room cringe. And then really get very excited about coming up with solutions. And I'm not getting down on developers, because developers have probably some of the best ideas because they know what's possible, but they have some of the best ideas for experiences. And so I love having developers, you know, connected at the hip as much as possible, because they're gonna be like, well, why did you do it that way? We could have did it, you know, 3 other different ways. I'm like, what? Educate me, help me understand. Like, let's all get this together. But you would never get that if you didn't have everybody in the room. So Clara, I am 1000% in your shoes on that one. I'm like, yes, bring all the people, herd all the cats, and like, let's all make something awesome together.
So I did want to kind of just bring one little thing around that for Sybil, citing things that we worked on together, but your users will tell you what's important. We had I came in, the average mobile across both platforms, across all 80 plus customers, was a 2.2 to 2.3 star average. And by bringing in user experience, by letting analytics drive what we prioritized and how we redid certain elements of design, and say, all this other stuff you want to do, that's fluff. And what did we get it up to? Within about, within less than a year, all platforms were at a 4.8 star average.
Oh yeah. High fours, very high fours.
It
Yeah.
was, it saves money, it makes money. User experiences, you know, developers expensive. I make good money. I don't know about y'all, but you know, so yeah. And with that, we're kind of towards the end. And I really want to get, you know, what are you doing now? How can we get in contact with you? How do we follow you? Throw it in the chat. Tell us about it. My daughter just woke up, so yeah. Hey, y'all, I have kids now. So
Love that. Are you gonna bring them on camera? Yeah, when I met Stacy, she didn't have kids, and 2 kids later, I'm like, they're babies.
Yeah, me too. I was completely surprised when she said, "Yeah, I have kids now."
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Just getting her out of the thing. But yeah, so thank you, whoever who put Melissa, thank you for putting the link in there. I was gonna do it. Oh, look at her. Cutie patootie. Oh, she's busy. She's looking at your keyboard, I bet. 100%. Yeah, that keyboard lights up and it is loud.
How old is she?
Oh, yeah. You're muted, by the way, Stacy, if you're talking.
she is just all eyes on the Super Rainbow keyboard. So you get some weird DMs. Don't be weirded out by it. Yep, it's already started. Sorry, Melissa, you're getting weird DMs. What have you done? Hotkeys. But again, really just you know, put anything that you want to share. And I've been keeping track of all of these lovely links that y'all have been putting in. And if you have anything else that you want to later, you know, share with our users, we are sorry, share with our members. I guess they're also users. So appreciate it on all fronts.
Thank you, everyone. I shared the panelists LinkedIn, the DFW Women Who Code LinkedIn, and then the recent resources list. Thank you.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you guys for the time, and it was great to chat with everybody. And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with anybody. But definitely, thank you for the time. This was awesome. I love talking about UX and design and all that stuff. And I'm a huge nerd like that. But I loved it. I had a really good time. So thank you for inviting me. I really do appreciate it.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Had a great time.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up and for having me. I wasn't able to keep track of all the questions, so if anyone asked me a question that I completely glossed over, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and just ask me there. I'll do my best to reply in a timely manner.
Same.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.